right, let's take a look at what we have in modules this week. And what we have, the breakdown is going to remind you that the only thing due this week is the application assignment because we're finishing chapter 5. And last time we talked about practicing anecdotal records, and this week we are talking about checklists. And yeah, so here's, let me download this. Actually, it'll be a little bit easier for everybody to see. I'm sure that you've seen checklists many times before. Here's a good example of one. So this one, it tells us that this checklist documents several children's skills observed in 2 different domains during a single classroom activity. And this is for a dramatic play, and this is nice because you can put the children's names across the top here. You can turn it and make it lengthwise, so you can make it longer if you want to. This happens to be social relationships, which would come out of the social emotional domains. Symbolic representation, that's going to come out of, I think that's probably going to come out of cognitive, although, yep, it would, cognitive. And they're using dramatic play to be able to kind of take care of 2 domains here at the same time, which is great because you're getting 2 things done at one time. So what they did was they shared, or they wrote down the 3 specific skills that they were looking at, because remember, we're always planning for what we want to be looking for. It helps us focus. And so the 3 skills are shares toys with a peer with physical assistance, shares toys with peer with verbal reminder, and shares toy with peer independently. And if you think about these are 3 different levels, right? This is the level we want them to be at eventually. This is beginning. This is kind of the middle skill, and this would be the older level skill. And they just use check marks for it. Yes, they can. No, they aren't. And here, symbolic representation, pretends to drink from a cup, uses a block as phone. That's the one I always think of when I think of symbolic representation. And then incorporates other children into pretend play, gives blocks to peer and says, call your sister. And so as they were observing in dramatic play, they check that either yes they can or no they can't, or yes they can. And if they leave it blank, that means that they're not able to do that. You can see when we talk about authentic assessment, these are really good examples of authentic assessment. So Isabella, Lila, Patrick, and Kamal are playing in dramatic play. They're just doing their own thing. The teacher's just observing and checking off skills as he or she sees them. Here's another type of checklist. And the other good thing about checklists is you can download them from the internet. Like, there's lots of choices out there where you can make your own. They're very flexible that way. This one is documenting multiple children's progress and retelling a story. So this would be under language and literacy, in retelling a story on 3 data collection points over a 4-week period. So here they were using dates as well. So here's the child's name. We're looking at expressive language. Here's what we are specifically looking for the child to do. These are the benchmarks. And again, you can see that these are like, this would be the simplest and this would be the hardest. And when we started evaluating Amina in February, she was able to retell 2 events. Same in March, the beginning of March, but then at the end of March, she retold 3 events from a favorite storybook. So when we're thinking about what our assessment data tells us, back here at the beginning of March, we know she's at the same place she was a couple of weeks prior. So when we're using the information from our data to plan what we're going to do in the classroom or plan what we're going to do with Amina to get her to that next level, Here, then, in this space is where we're planning activities to help Amina practice retelling 3 or more events in logical order. So again, it's probably practicing the same skills, finding her zone of proximal development, giving her some hints and some strategies for memory, and helping her practice that skill. Here we can see the same dates, but it was for Dylan. He was able to retell 1 event and then has moved up to 2 events. Here is a good place that I should have talked about the comments here. So let me talk about the comments. So here with Dylan, it says retold 2 events, but not in correct order. That's important to remember. So we have part of the memory skill. We don't have the entire memory skill, which means that she is, it means that we're probably at like a somewhat able to match that skill. Here, if you look at Amina's, it says retold 3 events from a favorite storybook. And in my brain, then I think that's a familiar book to her, and so it's probably easy for her to retell 3 events. What I would want to check next is if she could retell 3 events from a storybook that she doesn't know well. Coming back to modules, there are some other example checklists. There is and these are just examples for you to have. This one is a name writing checklist where you can list your whole class. And then here are the benchmarks. And you can fill this in however you want. Like, you would probably want to go in and figure out what the actual benchmarks are for name writing. This is a math checklist. And again, this is done over time, August, December, March, and June. So they're assessing 4 times a school year. And basically just checking it off if they can, and leaving it blank if they can't. So you can make your checklist for whatever you want it to be, as long as it makes sense that it's a checklist and doesn't need any a lot more specific detail. The checklist before this did have a few details, which is great. If you need any more than that, you probably need to look at doing at least some anecdotal records, if not some narrative writing. The last part of this talks about work samples and work samples in your classroom. Mostly we're choosing examples or taking photographs of children's work and interactions to demonstrate important learning goals. So it's going to work just exactly like it would work for checklists or anecdotal records. You know the skill that you are looking for, and the children do it in their work. Sometimes that work is on paper, and you can take a picture of it. Sometimes the work is with other students, like if we're doing social skills. So you can take a picture of it, but then you're going to have to annotate it. So you explain what is happening there. So you remember what the event was. Parents like to see work samples. And I think work samples are sometimes helpful to see growth over time. Checklists are helpful too. But man, when you are flipping through a portfolio and you see work from, a child's handwriting from month to month to month, it's really easy to see the growth if that happens. So in the context of work samples with our curriculum assessment, which would be like Teaching Strategies Gold on that assessment tools assignment that you're working on, we would be taking pictures of the work and uploading it into Teaching Strategies Gold, and then annotating it within the program, the computer program. That's the great thing about taking pictures, is children and students can take their work home and share it with family, but we still have a copy of what it looks like. So again, when you're deciding on what and when you're collecting, You're going to think about the specific skills or the learning goals. It's really important to plan how often you're going to collect work samples. And so like having a plan like on that previous checklist where they were doing August, December, I think March, I don't know what it was, February and June or March and June or something like that. Because if you don't have a plan, you're going to forget, and then you're going to be collecting a lot of things within the same time frame, and it's not going to show growth over time. Keeping it simple is important, having your camera handy, making sure that you go and download it into your assessment data or your computer or like whatever it is that you're using to keep track of it on a timely basis so that you don't forget what it is that you are looking at. And this is just a little in-class activity we would do together. So this is looking at 2 different work samples and what does each drawing reveal about the child. Do you see something that's particularly helpful to the assessment process? So this is a good example of a situation where you might not be collecting assessment data on a particular day, or you may happen to just be walking by the writing center on the way to the block area, and you happen to look down at this child's work, and you're looking at it and you think, oh, that's a good example of that child's work. How can I use it to determine a skill level? So it's kind of doing it backwards, where instead of like when we have it planned and what skills we're looking for, this is kind of just an example of it just happened because we're doing authentic assessment, right? And when I look at drawing, I think there's a good examples here of hand control, and how they do their body is indicative of the age group that they're in. And then if you are thinking about it, you may want to consider, what other additional information might make the sample more useful. How can it be helpful to the process? Here's another example. If we were comparing these two, we would notice that this one is more detailed, more eye-hand coordination, better eye-hand coordination, more realistic, but giving us an idea of their eye-hand coordination and their ability to hold the marker or the crayon. So the other thing I would probably want to be paying attention to is how they're holding the pencil or the crayon or the marker. Maybe taking a picture of that, because sometimes they're still holding like this. Sometimes they're holding, children are holding in different ways, and we really want to try to get them into that tripod position eventually. We could also ask them about their drawing and dictate what it is that they were drawing for them. Dictate for them what they were drawing. Gets us into their little brains a little bit and what they're thinking about. You might be able to think of some other ways that you could use this for collecting work as assessment data. All right. Now, the book talks about several different examples of how we can, sorry, I'm trying to get the camera back to me. I don't know if I can. How we can, different tools. So we didn't go through narrative, we didn't go through rubric, but make sure that you read all of the assessment tools from the book and gather that information so that you know that those are choices that you can have as well. Reach out if I can help in any way.